Some of the things that damage the gut the most are toxic compounds, food additives, dyes, preservatives. When you go to the fast food joint, you're exposing yourself to heavy metals and pesticides. You're exposing yourself to high calorie, low nutritional density foods that will malnourish you. And you're damaging your gut by eating them. The more you damage your body's so amazing, it can heal. It's not like you go eat one meal and your gut's totally destroyed. Your body will react and it will heal and it will help you for decades before you can get sick.
This is Doctor Talks.
Welcome back to another interview on reversing chronic gut conditions. I'm your host, Sinclair Canale, and today I am joined by the wonderful Dr. Peter Osborne. Now, Peter, it was really important to me to get on this summit for you guys to hear his wisdom and his expertise because he's been such an important force in the space for cracking open some of these mysteries. Why are our chronic gut conditions persisting, right? What has gone wrong in our culture and our diet that we would not be able to heal ourselves, right? Since the gut itself, since our digestive system is one of the most resilient really in the whole body and can heal so quickly, it's really astonishing how long these conditions can persist. So I'm going to be picking Peter's brain for you on your behalf today. Why is this happening? How can we unpack this? What is available to us outside of supplementation? And of course, Dr. Peter is the author of the longtime bestseller, No Grain, No Pain. If you haven't read that yet, you must pick it up. I was just telling Peter, I've bought like 10 copies over the years and I keep giving mine away to somebody. So it's really fantastic. And he's also the host of the Glutenology Masterclass series and has a fantastic YouTube channel. So we're really thrilled to have Dr. Peter on with us today. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, let's just dive right in because you were one of the first ones to really sound this alarm in a way that, you know, the whole population could hear, right? So help me understand let's start by unpacking for the audience, maybe from a timeline perspective, when you saw, gluten becoming a serious issue and what your personal journey was in its discovering that and sharing it with the world.
Yeah, I go back to when I was in graduate school going through a residence program in the rheumatology department at the VA hospital. And I'm a veteran of the Air Force. And so I have a fondness for other veterans, in my heart. They should be taken good care of. At the very least, they should be taken great care of. And so in this rotation that I was involved with, I would watch these soldiers coming in through the VA. In the Houston, they come from Louisiana. They come from all over, right? So they're coming from all over. The rheumatology department is largely treating autoimmune disease. So imagine rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, scleroderma, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis, etc. And, they made a huge deal. My attending docs made a huge deal about differential diagnosis, meaning it was super important to get it right. You had to memorize the criteria that, for the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis, there's 7 criteria and patients have to have 4 out of the 7, like that kind of thing, right? Which to me, because the criteria for diagnosis, in large part, most of the criteria were subjective, not objective. I didn't understand why it was a big deal because, my historical perspective on rheumatological disease was most people would go to 5 different rheumatologists and get 5 different diagnoses anyway. So why the hubbub? Anyway, they handed me this big, thick text called the Primer on Rheumatological Disease. It's a big, thick book and said, don't come back until you read it. And that was Friday, right? So, here I've got to go home now and spend a weekend away from the people I love most. Which is one of the sacrifices that we make when we're going through school, right? As we spend a lot of time in study. So I went home and I read the book and I made a ton of doggy ear notes and highlights and everything else. And so when I came back on Monday to the internship, I was quiet. I wanted to just kind of observe because this was my real first day clinically working there, right? So what I did is about 2 weeks of observation and just kept my mouth shut and kind of stayed at the back of the room, with the other newbies, with the other green ears, right? And so anyway, after 2 weeks, I started to ask questions. And one of the first questions I asked was, why aren't we doing any objective testing to any great degree? Because, you asked me to read this book, and this book really, although not really super organized, does, if you read it, spell out all the potential possible known triggers for autoimmune disease. So as an example, certain types of pesticides are known to be triggers, right? And so there was in depth, there were chapters on kind of going through some of that information with certain types of autoimmune disease. I'm like, why aren't we testing these people for pesticide exposure? Because that's a trigger. I mean, my frustration was that in 2 weeks of observation, every patient, no matter what the diagnosis, got the same set of drugs and the basic same treatments, right? Which is at the time was methotrexate, which is a cancer medication, but because it inhibits DNA and RNA synthesis, it can stop pain. And unfortunately, it also rips holes in the gut lining and damages and destroys the GI tract, which would perpetuate an autoimmune disease pretty much indefinitely, right? And so that was my frustration is if we know that there are triggers for autoimmune disease, but we're not objectively testing our patients for those triggers and we're giving everybody the same medication, then why does it matter whether or not we have a nuanced diagnosis? To me, that was more the doctors having big egos because they could say big words, but not really having big outcomes or big results for the people that they should care about the most. And I didn't like that. So anyway, I was told that's just the way it was and we weren't going to do that. And then so I kept quizzing. I kept quizzing the attending and I wasn't doing it. It wasn't like out of disrespect. I wasn't like trying to be that snarky student in the back of the room that was trying to catch the teacher in a bind. It was just really out of pure curiosity and pure care, for the people that were under our care. But what evolved in that rotation was ultimately one of the days, I can't remember if it was Tuesday or Wednesday, but it was called surgical consult day. And it was very revealing because on surgical consult days, you'd have patients that would come in again from Texas, but also from attached states because they all kind of filtered into the Houston VA hospital. And these were people that had been on the drugs for 20 years, 15 years, they'd been on the methotrexate that long. And ultimately their disease was still progressing. Their pain was not being controlled. Their joints were still destroyed. And so surgical consult day was all about popping an x-ray and then saying, yeah, you're a good candidate for surgery. Let's schedule it. Like there was no orthopedic exam. The orthos would come to the floor and they would just basically put an x-ray of the patient up and say, yeah, they look like they're a good candidate. And there was no like detailed history taking or note taking or any, no common conversations with the actual patient. Just, yeah, you look like a good candidate for surgery. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? This guy's been on methotrexate for 20 years. His gut's destroyed. He's malnourished. There's no way he's coming out of that surgery healing because surgery is a trauma, right? I call surgery scheduled trauma, and sometimes surgeries are necessary. But at the end of the day, if somebody's malnourished, the level of potential for complications post-surgically is astronomically high. And you're asking somebody that's been medicated with steroids and methotrexate, two drugs that destroy the gut and destroy absorption and digestion of nutrition from food that we eat, but also induce nutritional deficiencies biochemically. Nutritional deficiencies like vitamin C and vitamin D and calcium and magnesium. These are the nutrients that you need to knit and heal and repair cartilage and collagen, which you're about to cut into this person and rip all those things out. They're going to need those nutrients to heal. And you're not even measuring to see what their status is pre-surgically to give them a better outcome. And it made me mad. And so it was that anger that fueled me and emboldened me to just continue to question because now it wasn't just, okay, what about pesticides? What the book taught me. So I can't take full credit, but for this fundamental knowledge. I mean, I read this and I just applied it. Right. And that is there are four common primary triggers for autoimmune disease, no matter what it is, no matter, whether it's rheumatoid or rheumatological or whether it's thyroid like Hashimoto's or Graves', whether it's liver like autoimmune hepatitis or skin diseases like psoriasis or eczema. Four triggers. So if your audience wants to write those down, this is what I would demand of any doctor if I were a patient or being a patient advocate. Number one, first triggers food. And we knew that. We had the largest body of research conducted on a cause of autoimmune disease in celiac disease. I mean, this is not rocket science. We've known about celiac disease since the 1950s, and we've known about food being the trigger for it. So it's not rocket science or even a huge leap to say, okay, well, if one autoimmune disease is caused by food, wouldn't it go to say that other autoimmune diseases could also have a food trigger? And so the amount of research, though, on people with celiac disease who also develop rheumatological disease is vast. Yeah, there's a high percentage of people that have celiac that go on to develop RA, or that a high percentage of people with RA that also have celiac, right? So when I started diving into that literature and really reading it, I would bring stacks of studies to my attending, and he would throw it in the garbage and say, "We're not doing this." And then I'd go back to the library because in Houston, I had the access to the largest, one of the largest medical libraries in the world. And at the time, there were no computers. It wasn't like you pop on PubMed and you can access 10 million research studies right now. It was you go to the library, you pull the dusty volumes of journals that are bound, or you pull the microfiche and you scroll through microfiche. And then you go to the copy machine and you make copies. And then you take it all home and you have your trusty highlighter and you highlight the stuff. And then I had a special computer program that I'd created where I would scan the documents in and I had a big, huge database before PubMed existed where we were categorizing, the nutrient, the vitamin, the disease associations with the vitamin, the disease triggers, all that kind of stuff. So I had this big database that I had started to collect. But anyway, part of that when I was at the VA hospital was bringing that research to my attending. And so some of it was the research on gluten. And then he threw that away. And so I brought him the research on fasting. And I said, look, fasting can alleviate pain in 48 hours. There's no drug alive that can do that. None. No drug is known that we can't even compare even close to the efficacy of just not eating. And if that doesn't tell you that food plays a role in a person's autoimmune disease, I don't know how to get through to you. Well, he threw that out. And then I brought him research on fish oil because I thought, okay, fish oil is something, there's a prescription fish oil. Maybe we could get him to write prescription fish oil for these patients. Fish oil is more effective at anti-inflammatory than is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, right? So when you take it in high enough doses, like 4 to 8 grams a day, it actually is more impactful and more effective for inflammation. Nope, he threw that in the garbage too. So I was 3 strikes and I was out. They hated me there. They did not like me as a student. They wanted me out of there as quick as they could get out of there, and I was happy to leave, frankly, because it was very depressing and demoralizing to know that they were just completely ignoring research and pumping the same old line and didn't again, but they made all this damn nuance about, "Oh, well, you've gotta have the criteria right because you got to get the diagnosis right." I'm like, why? Why do you have to get the diagnosis right? This person has lupus and you prescribed them methotrexate. This person had ankylosing spondylitis and you prescribed them methotrexate. This person had rheumatoid arthritis and you prescribed them methotrexate. What the hell does the nuance matter other than you sounding smarter than everyone else in the room, which has no applicable outcome of improvement for your patients, the people that are coming to you who are depending on you and trusting you for their care. And it was, yeah, like I said, it just pissed me off. So when I left the VA hospital, one of the first things I did is I opened my own practice, and I had a little girl come to see me, and her name was Ginger. She was 9, and she had a diagnosis of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and she had been being pumped full of methotrexate since she was 2. She got her diagnosis at the age of 2. And here we are 7 years later, and her mom brings her in to see me. And what had happened was 7 years of being treated by the rheumatologist. The rheumatologist looked at her mom and said, "There's nothing more we can do for your daughter. She might have 6 months. You need to go home and get your affairs in order." Because this little girl was very sick. Her knees would swell up. When she was an infant, she couldn't crawl. They would get so swollen. And when she was a young child, she couldn't go on the playground with everyone else because they would get so swollen. And she had pain management so frequently, she had a port embedded in her arm, a permanent one, because she was in and out of the hospital so frequently for pain management and treatment. And when I got her, it was like God was just dropping her in my lap and saying, "Here you go, prove it." And so the first thing I did was I tested her for gluten sensitivity and she was positive. So we took her gluten free, and within 6 months, the port came out of her arm and she wasn't dead. And within a year, she was completely in remission and off of all medication. And today she's graduated college. So this was where I really was able to take my experience that was good and bad. It was good in some ways and bad in other ways, and apply it in a real world application with my own patient and find that not only could we help somebody, but we could literally save their life. And if you look at autoimmune disease as a whole, there are about 140 different types of autoimmune disease. And for females, some would argue it's definitely in the top 5 causes of death in females under the age of 65. But some would argue, and I'm one of them, that argue that it's the top cause of death. in females under the age of 65 because of some of the autoimmune diseases technically should be classified as autoimmune, but they're not yet.
Mm.
But the mechanisms have been researched and they are autoimmune mechanisms. So that being the case, you know, we saved her life. And then that was it for me. From there on, I knew I now it was less academic and now it was more real world experience. And so from there, you know, my mission has been ever since then to save as many lives as I could of people who, you know, were run through that crappy system of lack of empathy and lack of science and really the cloak of expertise, right? you know, the wolf in sheep's clothing because they, you know, they drape themselves in these white cloaks and talk in very big language and people can't understand it and they're misguiding and misleading people. And I'm not saying all doctors are bad or all doctors are you know, are intentionally doing it. Some of them just don't know any better. But the time for not knowing any better is over. Like, I could see maybe not knowing any better 25 years ago prior to the internet. But today, you know, if I want to learn about something, I can learn about it and I can master a topic or a knowledge in 2 days. You know, if I really want to learn academically, not experience wise, but academically, I could pull all that information available in the world and I could convene to learn that in a very short period of time. So these doctors don't have any excuse. They can no longer hide behind there's no research because even in the time of microfish, I was showing them the research and they were ignoring the research. They were ignoring their own research. It wasn't like this was out of a men's health journal. Hey, they say you could fast, you know, like, no, this was like other rheumatologists that had MD, PhD degrees that were doing studies where fasting was showing massive improvement in patients. And you're just ignoring that in lieu of the pharmaceutical funded research that's obviously going to be biased toward medications and obviously going to be biased toward prescription, all because it takes longer to have a diet conversation with a patient. Like if I'm going to teach somebody about gluten in my practice, you know, one-on-one, it's an hour conversation minimum, you know, and then we have, you know, I've created a 14-hour class that we give to our patients, you know, so they can go home and dive into it. But that requires time and effort and caring and empathy and understanding. And it requires, you know, a knowledge of how to implement technology, you know, in a learning platform scenario so that you can help the people that are paying you to help them. And anyway, so that whole model was just so broken. So my practice basically was launched by seeing ginger and then just knowing the real world application of how diet change could literally save someone's life despite the medications and despite the ignorance of the medical interventions.
You know, I'm so glad to hear you share this story in this way because I know there's so many people in the audience that feel deeply seen right now because this is the experience, right? And we normalize it and then it just becomes a rite of passage. Hey, I am alive in this day and age, and therefore I'm participating in this food culture and, you know, getting exposed to these toxicants. And now I'm going to go get gaslit by the medical system until I finally am unwell enough to get a diagnosis. And it doesn't matter what the diagnosis is because the treatment, it doesn't even reflect the data that's available today. That's the truth of it.
Yeah, and then, you know, drugs, people don't until they get into this world, they don't realize that, you know, prescription medication is the third leading cause of death. Let that sink in, you know. This was over 20 years ago, there was a doctor strike in California and the death rates went down. Look, I'm not anti-doctor, I'm not anti-hospital, I'm not anti, you know, go get help if you need help, but our system sucks. If you've got a chronic degenerative autoimmune problem, our system is the worst healthcare in the world. Now, if you've got a broken bone or a you know, need to get a bullet removed, you know, or a knife stab sewn up or, you know, an accident fixed. You know, those guys are phenomenally good. Our emergency room doctors can sew you, patch you. They can save your life if you have a heart attack, you know, like because but I think at the end of the day, and look, it's not all doctors either. It's patients have to advocate for themselves. You can't just dispense your responsibility for the precious gift of life to a stranger and trust or in trust that they're going to have your best interest. They're not thinking about you when they go home. I promise you that. They saw 50 people today. I've been there. I've been in high volume practice where you were seeing 50, 60 a day. You don't have the bandwidth to think about people. That's why I left that environment. I left that environment because I needed the bandwidth to be able to think about the people who were entrusting me with their care.
That's
And
crazy.
and if you can't do that, and if you're not doing that, in my opinion, get the hell out of doctoring. Like you don't belong there. Like what you're doing is you're just basically you're running a scalable business model that doesn't serve your customer and you're enriching yourself doing it while hurting others. And that there's no place for that. And there's no excuse for that anymore. The knowledge is out there. This isn't like fringe stuff anymore. Like gluten free was a fringe word 20 years ago, but
Mhm.
me and a few of my colleagues made sure that today everybody in the world has heard of the gluten free diet. Why have they heard of it? Because the work we've done and the outcomes don't lie. Now, if a gluten-free diet sucked and didn't help anyone, no one would ever still hear about it, right? But because it works so remarkably well and people have had life-changing, life-saving transformations using diet change, that whispers become a roar. And
Mhm.
even still, in the face of that roar, we have a medical profession that continues to ignore it. It's like the house is on fire and they're telling you, no, the house is not burning down. It's in your head. All the while we're all inhaling smoke and we're burning up with it. You can't hide it forever. And that's why I think we're in for a medical revolution. I think that's starting to happen. I think with the term functional medicine, there've been other words, and I don't really like the term functional medicine. I like the term self-responsibility. You owe yourself the knowledge. I mean, how much time do people spend researching which phone they're going to buy or researching which car they're going to drive or researching you know, what vacation they're gonna take, and how many people spend equal amounts of time researching how well they should be exercising or focusing time and attention on quality sleep or sunshine or good healthy food. And I think the age of self and personal responsibility has to be the next age. Because if it's not, I mean, what's gonna happen? We spent $4 trillion last year on medicine. 4.2 trillion. That is enough to bankrupt us, right? And it's on care that doesn't work. Like, by the way, like, so $4 trillion on drugs and surgeries that didn't fix the origin or educate the patient, right? I mean, all of our efforts should be in educating the patient on how to empower themselves and basically handing them back responsibility. That ultimately, because if we do that, then they're gonna drive the consumer need for organic food, and that's gonna lower the price of organic food. It's gonna make organic food more available. It's gonna drive the consumer need for healthy houses, for building houses properly that don't where they don't become mold traps. It's gonna
Right.
drive the need for so many things in our society that are more health oriented and less reactive. Because medicine's just a reactive profession, right? Oh, you're in your worst state, you just had a stroke or a heart attack. Yeah, we're reacting to the way you've abused your body over the last 20 years. And part of it is your fault, but the other part is our fault because we've been appeasing you for 20 years saying, yeah, don't worry about that diet and exercise stuff. Here's a diabetic drug. Here's metformin. Here's a statin. Here's Zocor or Lipitor. Let's keep your cholesterol low without being any more detail oriented or actual outcomes oriented.
Right. I completely agree. Michael, that's my partner in practice, Michael Spandel. He always says the doctor of the future is you. And one of the biggest things that we still have to educate on today, even for people who are super proactive, like everybody watching this now, is obviously taking their health into their own hands, and good on you. And we still have to unpack this cascade of beliefs that, are interconnected. Like if you're in the US or if you're in a developed country, somehow there's this presupposition that we don't have to think for ourselves because if it's on the shelf, some regulatory body did that for us. And nothing could be further from the truth, right? In the US, the burden of proof is on the consumer to say, hey, this chemical or this fake food or this medicine is harming me. And you have to go through the legal system to actually prove that at great cost to yourself. And so it's a very laborious process that is usually left undone. And then, the chemical companies go, oh, that's too bad. Don't worry. We have another one right behind it that's basically, a duplicate because we can't afford an interruption in business, right?
Yeah, and our regulatory agencies are captured. I mean, they're not, even if we were to say, okay, well, yeah, we want to send experts up to Washington to police certain things, that's great. I think in concept it's fine, but when they're all being bought off, when there's a revolving door of people who are supposed to be regulating the industry, and then they end up going and working for the industry, and then they go back and they become regulators, like that's not serving us. They're all getting rich and we're all getting sick. And people have this naive trust that governments have our best intention. And I think governments maybe theoretically have our best intention, but the outcome is that it's not so great, right? Just look at the last 3 years. Look at what happened. I don't know what your audience feels about COVID, and we don't have to have that conversation because that's a big thing to unpack. But I think at this point, it's quite obvious that, when you're trying to coerce people into getting something by giving them lottery tickets and giving them donuts, and like your
Right.
message is
And
very
yeah.
skewed, your message is very wrong when you're saying you have to take this chemical shot that we don't have any data on, not really, no long-term data especially, and don't worry about zinc. And let's take every doctor who's talking about vitamin D and zinc and quercetin, and let's send the FTC into their office and give them a roto-rooter and try to shut them down. And they try to shut down natural immunity as even a thing. Like there's no such thing. Like they're basically saying that you have to rely on us because your body's so weak and pathetic that it has no capacity to protect you. That's what our government's message is. And if you think anything differently, then you're a naive fool. That's
Not only that, you're going to get censored. You could have your medical license pulled if you refuse to let the government decide what is, right for your body. You could lose your job, your livelihood, your family could be in peril. Like is that really, a government that you want to trust?
right. Is that the tyranny you want to live under? Not me. I fought in war. I know what war is like. I've been to countries where tyranny is there. I've seen beheadings and stonings. I know what that's like. No, thank you. I don't want that coming to our shores.
Yeah. So all that is to say that we are in charge of our own bodies. And the more we outsource that to somebody, the more we prolong and increase our pain, right?
Yeah, and absolutely. You have to get to the point in your own mind that you can respect your doctor. You can have a conversation with them. But if they're not being inquisitive, if they're not being, I'll use a term that everybody knows, Sherlock Holmes, if they're not acting, in a Sherlock Holmes type way where they're trying to help you investigate, why you have your illness, then they're not doctoring you. They're putting a toxic band-aid on your symptom, and that won't serve you in the long haul.
What I would like you to unpack very briefly is this concept of natural immunity and gut health. And how should we be thinking about that in today's day and age?
So I mean, the gut is ultimately, if we just define it as what it is, it's a tube from your mouth to your anus. Its fundamental primary job is it's a quarantine zone. What is it quarantining? It's taking, because when you eat, there's dangerous things in food, even healthy organic food. There's dangerous things there, right? We have different plant chemicals. We have different types of bugs, viruses, bacteria, fungus, etc. Even with the best intentions, right? But the gut is so awesome that it has this amazing, wonderful immune system and this amazing, wonderful system of checks and balances that it can quarantine that food, and it can take what's good from that food, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and break them down into amino acids and fatty acids and smaller substrates and vitamins and minerals. And it can recognize what's good and let those things into the bloodstream. And it can recognize what's not good, and it
Mm.
can push that in, form stool with it, and then it comes out the other end. And now it's good there because now it's fertilizing something else, right? So like the system that we have where we can take what we need, quarantine the bad out, and then sustain great health as a result. So that's your gut, right? And so you have to look at that as, first of all, you never want to do something to that gut that has the potential to damage it, especially something consistently long term. So, some of the things that damage the gut the most, are toxic compounds, food additives, dyes, preservatives. When you go to the fast food joint, you're exposing yourself to heavy metals and pesticides. You're exposing yourself to high calorie, low nutritional density foods that will malnourish you. And you're damaging your gut by eating them. And, the more you damage your body's so amazing, it can heal. It's not like you go eat one meal and your gut's totally destroyed. It's your body will react, and it will help you for decades before you can get sick, right? Because a lot of the stuff, the reason why fast food isn't banned as poison is because it doesn't kill you quickly. And so it's like, you think of it like the slowest poisons are the most dangerous poisons, right? Fast poison's easy. Okay, I took some arsenic and it killed me. Okay, no more arsenic. We got to get that stuff out. But okay, low doses are okay. Anyway, my point being that slow poison is insidious because it has a nefarious will to act in such a way that it creates low levels of chronic inflammation over long periods of time to such a great extent that your body ultimately will break down, but won't break down today. And when you recognize that, just like with anything else, if you look at, if we look at bodybuilders who say, did they work out once and get muscles? No, that was years, right? Look at a gymnast. Did they train once and now they can do, they can do cartwheels for miles and their abs are like, out to here? No, they were training 15 years for that to happen, right? It's the little things. It's the things that you do day in and day out that have the long-term ramifications and consequences, just like in life.
Mm.
You don't become wealthy by making a whole bunch of money in one day and putting it in the bank. You put a little away all the time and you have the magic of compounded interest over time. Like that, it's the behavior repetitively that allows you to have the outcome, good or bad, right? And so when you have a repetitive behavior of slowly damaging yourself with things that are societally acceptable but not necessarily healthy, then you're going to end up in a place where your body is now compromised and your GI tract becomes compromised. And, and then the first thing that people do when they have the set of symptoms is they visit a doctor. That's typically, when it gets bad enough, you go to the doctor. And the first thing that most of the doctors are going to do is they're going to pull out the prescription pad. And if your problem is related or pain oriented, that prescription pad might be something like a steroid for pain or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory or even an opiate type pain relieving medication. And all these drugs damage your gut. If you're slow poison over your life, raised your blood pressure, they're going to give you a blood pressure medication. And some of those blood pressure medications damage your gut, like angiotensin receptor blockers, one of the most commonly prescribed blood pressure medications, actually causes villus atrophy. There's 100 and I think 28 or 38 studies now that show that class of medication can cause villus atrophy. If you get heartburn, you're going to take an antacid. And those drugs damage your stomach acid, which is part of your immune system, right? Your immune system, your acid is what is part of your gut's immune mechanism. It's what kills off invaders like virus, bacteria, etc., from colonizing your lower GI tract. And now you're going to suppress that acid. And then you need that acid to absorb calcium and magnesium and zinc and selenium and chromium and copper and protein, etc. Now you're going to become malnourished. And once you become malnourished, your immune system doesn't have the tools and the resources it needs to keep functioning, right? So now it's a vicious feed forward cycle. Once you hit the point where you've eaten enough poison or done enough damage to yourself, the gut fundamentally is now breaking down. You're trying to medicate it, but the medicines you're taking are breaking it down faster. And now you become malnourished. And so now you become devoid of the nutrients that are necessary to maintain it. And then you hit an accelerant. Like now it's like the fire, you poured gasoline on it, diesel on it, you put a bunch of wood shavings in it and then you lit it and it just blew up like a bomb. And that's where a lot of people end up. It just takes them 20 or 30 years to get there. But there are clues all along the way. The clues are things like brain fog and fatigue and I'm getting older, my vision's slipping, or my knee hurts a little bit more than what it used to hurt, or I'm gaining a little weight and I don't know why, or I'm a little stiff and achy all the time. Like these are clues. These are not normal things. Doctors will try to gaslight you into believing that your body fundamentally breaking down as a result of being 30 or 40 or even 50 is a normal thing. I'm 50 and I feel great. I'm 50 and I'm in probably better shape than I was when I was 20. And that's, if you have one of my heroes is Jack LaLanne. He was a chiropractor who, if you remember him, he's older generation, but he made juicing popular. He had the LaLanne juicer. And anyway, he celebrated his 88th birthday swimming the English Channel with 8 people in a boat strapped to his back. That man was a beast. And he never let age be his excuse. He never let that. I mean, I'm not saying people don't age because, we have the oxygen paradox, which is the thing we need to survive, which is oxygen is also the thing that slowly rusts us. But there's a big difference between graceful aging and aggressively aging. I mean, the perfect way to understand that, look at a cigarette smoker's face. They look 10, 15 years older than a non-cigarette smoker. Why? Because they're puffing on a free radical all day long. They're accelerating their aging process and damaging their DNA. So you have choices that you make every day. You choose what you eat. You choose what you put in your mouth. That's probably one of the biggest choices that you can make. And so that choice consistently over time is either going to equate to a healthy GI tract and healthy functioning and healthy digestion and absorption and healthy nutritional status, or it's going to equate to something other than that. And that's the road and the path to disease.
Yeah, I think you've touched on so many important points here. And I really want to unpack this nutrient deficiency with you further. And before I do, you had so many good references about medications that actually contribute to nutrient deficiencies and gut damage over time. Did we leave any out? Medications as damagers of the gut that you want to make sure people
Oh,
are aware of.
a lot of them. Every medicine comes with a price. Every one, every single one. You
Thank
know,
you.
ladies with breast cancer, if you took tamoxifen has now been shown to actually drive lupus. It actually can contribute to the creation of autoimmune disease. You
Mhm.
know, if you're taking excessive hormones, and I say excessive, a lot of people get put on hormone therapies. Some people need them, but a lot of times people get put on them and their doctors don't monitor their levels very effectively. Well, there's a cost to that because, estrogen can cause magnesium and vitamin B6 and vitamin C and vitamin B2 deficiencies and zinc deficiency.
Mhm.
Testosterone can cause that. So, if you're just thinking you'll go to your doctor and get some hormones to feel young again, you're going to pay a nutritional price there. If you're taking combinations of things like when you take a steroid, for example, for pain and you mix it with like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, it's like a 7 to 10 fold increased risk for ripping holes in your gut microscopically. So sometimes it's when you combine certain medications, and we have, I think don't quote me on this, but it's like the average 50 plus person is on 4 or more
Right.
medications, and none of these drugs were ever studied in combination. They were only ever studied one disease, one drug, as far as safety and efficacy, but the interreactions that they have were never really truly studied and approved as safe. So, I get all kinds of polypharmacy folks that come in and they're, 15 medications deep and they're messes. And a lot of the reason they're messes isn't because of their choices. It's because the medicines are synergistically destroying them and they don't even really realize it. They're slow poisons sometimes too. But other very common medicines that can cause nutritional deficit. Drugs for diabetes, metformin particularly causes B12 deficiency, folate deficiency, CoQ10 deficiency, which is ironic because metformin is supposed to reduce your risk of heart disease by controlling your blood sugar. And when you have CoQ10 deficiency, you can develop high blood pressure and congestive heart failure, right? So you see the irony in it. It's medicine. There are textbooks written on this. Probably the best author on the topic, Daphne Rowe, ROE. You can buy her books. They're very expensive because they're older, and there aren't very many in circulation. They were kind of taken out of circulation. I have all of her books, but she did a great job of helping us understand the biochemistry behind how medications can either cause nutritional deficiency by damaging the gut, causing malabsorption, or they can cause nutritional deficiency by creating a biochemical need for more of that nutrient in order to process that drug, right? Or causing a nutritional deficiency because they somehow have some type of conflicting damage to an organ or a tissue. And so we'll burn up more nutrients in an effort to try to heal or repair that tissue. So there are a lot of different potential mechanisms. But again, I think it's important that everybody understands there's no free rides. Every medicine you pay a price for. That's why in pharmacy there's a name for it. It's called risk benefit.
Mhm.
What is the risk of the side effects of this drug versus the benefit that it might give me? And I think it's important. That's what informed consent is all about. It's important that if you're going to choose to take a medicine, your doctor should have a conversation about drug induced nutritional deficit as it relates to that medicine and give you all the facts. And that way you can make an informed consent decision instead of your doctor just gaslighting you saying side effects are rare. It's not okay. It's not good enough. Side effects aren't rare. Not when you take that drug and mix it with 4 others. Now we don't even know. And most doctors say the side effects are rare because they ignore the fact that their patients are having side effects and they call the new side effect a new disease and then they medicate the new disease with another drug. Like, and if that's your attitude, if your attitude is to bandage everything, every little symptom with another pharmaceutical chemical, then yeah, you'll never see the forest through the trees. But if your audience wants to know more in specific, I've got several articles on different drugs that affect the GI tract and how they affect the GI tract, as well as a chart on drug-induced nutritional deficiencies that I'd be happy to share.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. This is so important because we haven't even gotten to actual like side effects, and in the context of chronic gut conditions. I don't know about you, but so many of the people who come to our practice, they're coming because of mold or parasites. And, those are wonderful topics we're super passionate about, but they're on things to help them, sleep and poop and, they have an autoimmune disease or more than one. I certainly did. So I understand the path of how they got here, but they're on these drugs that the side effects are digestive conditions. The side effects are digestive symptoms. And they're like, oh, well, can you work around this or can you help me get off of these? And like, no, as natural health practitioners, as a traditional naturopath, I legally cannot comment on that. I got to turn you back around. You got to go back to your prescribing doctor. You got to work on a plan to get off of this because I can't help you get off of them. And you're coming to me for the side effects. And it's so frustrating. It's a really weird landscape that we're in.
It is, and I think that's where people just get themselves empowered, then they can start making some of their own decisions. Remember that your doctor prescribing you something is not an order, it's not a mandate.
Right.
It's a recommendation. That's why they call it an opinion. You always hear that, "Go get a second opinion," "Go get a
Mhm.
third opinion." Yeah, those are opinions. They're subjective opinions, and think about it. If you're on multi-pharmacy, how much time did your doctor spend with you, conversing with you about your history and about the nuance and the ins and outs of your life and your behaviors before making that recommendation of a very high, powerful drug that they want you to stay on for the rest of your life? How much time did they devote to you before they just made that decision for you? And again, it goes back to you. You have to be smarter than that. You have to make that decision weighing the risk and the benefit. And it's not if the doctor's not doing their job, it's either your job to fire them or it's your job to go and do that work and that research so that you are an informed consumer, because that's what changes the world. What's not going to change your health if you just listen and you just take whatever it is they throw at you. You have to make sure it's the right fit, and it's not always the right fit. If it were the right fit, it wouldn't be the third leading cause of death in the U.S. I mean, that if that doesn't wake you up and alarm you to the nature of the problem, nothing will.
This is so important because I remember vividly, I came from mental health first and was chronically ill, crashed. I was mystery patient X, you know, I unhooked myself and walked out of the hospital because they just stopped caring. They were like really interested and excited to run tests on me at first. And then they're like, oh, well, this is no longer fun because I can't, easily categorize you. And everybody went to a different diagnosis. And the pressure to medicate is super intense. And then you go to the next one, they have a completely different diagnosis. And it's like the metformin dispensary that you worked at. It's just, this is not working. Okay, so I really want to highlight a couple of things before we run out of time. In your zone of genius, I mean, obviously, this is all your zone of genius, but you said something really crucial that I want to unpack a little bit. And I was getting interviewed the other day, and somebody said, well, we're overnourished in this country. And I was like, no, we're not. We're overfed and malnourished. And I really want you to help people understand, these gluten induced nutritional deficiencies, these lifestyle induced nutritional deficiencies that really affect gut health for the long term. I would just love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, 60% of your nutrients that your gut receives comes from the food you eat directly, like what you put in your mouth. Actually, 100% does, but directly. So, like, as your gut's being nourished, it's actually being nourished by the food as it comes through you, versus, like, say, your heart, which is being nourished through the bloodstream, or your liver that's being nourished through the bloodstream. So, the gut itself has to get nutrition from the food that you eat. This comes back to high calorie diets with low vitamin and mineral content. Give your body work to do. Understand that digestion doesn't come free. Like, it's a very, very energy laden process where we're breaking food down through multiple different biochemical processes that require energy. That requires chemical conversions, right? Which that energy is provided through vitamins and minerals, right? Vitamins and minerals are what we oftentimes refer to as cofactors, and they play a role in regulating the little tiny motors inside of our cells. These little motors are what either generate energy or generate function. And these motors, think of them as the car keys to these motors are like zinc and magnesium and calcium and B vitamins, etc. So if you're eating a low nutrient density diet, which generally speaking is what America's diet is, it's, roughly 60 plus, 70 plus percent carbohydrate diet, and those are processed carbs. So you have to understand the history of processed carbs. America in 1943 banned the sale of processed grain because they were responsible for killing people to the tune of 8,000 or so deaths a year through beriberi and pellagra. So these were diseases, these were plagues that were B vitamin deficiency diseases that were actually being caused by processed grain consumption.
Mm.
And the solution, instead of saying these foods that are processed aren't good for us, the solution was we need to fortify with synthetic vitamins. And that's where food fortification came from. It actually came from the need to not kill people with the food they were eating. And the brilliant stroke of marketing genius, which was, in my opinion, rather evil, was from Kellogg. Kellogg, if you've heard of Kellogg cereal, right? Kellogg was a doctor, and his brother was a marketer, and they created cornflakes together, and the company Kellogg. Well, instead of saying, "Hey, don't eat cereal because it's going to kill you," they said instead, "Hey, eat more of it because it's now fortified with vitamins and minerals, so it's an even bigger, healthier part of your day," right? And we all grew up with that kind of cereal commercial message: part of a balanced breakfast, part of a balanced breakfast, part of a balanced breakfast. Notice they never said it is a balanced breakfast. It is a balance. They had to say part of a balanced breakfast because they knew what they were selling you was an incomplete, nutrient lacking, toxic swill that cost them pennies, but they could charge you $8 a box for, right? Like, so it was a huge markup and it was huge profitability coming from cheap labor and cheap food, where they could throw some synthetic vitamins in it and trick you with marketing to make you think your kids needed it, right? Cereal was an invention in 1895. Prior 1895, cereal didn't really exist. Post created the first cereal, Kellogg followed, and this was all early 1800 or late 1800s. So most people don't realize that because they grow up thinking, oh gosh, cereal, cereal. We grew up with it, right? So we kind of reinforce this false belief that somehow that's been a staple food for humans for generations, and it has not.
Right,
Um,
and then
not
people feel
longer than
deprived, like, "Oh, you're not gonna let me have my cereal because I have
yeah.
this gut issue." It's like, well, you're not missing out on this, like, right to exist. You're missing out on a marketing phenomenon, that's all.
Well, today's luxuries are tomorrow's necessities. And so, originally, what you would say cereal was that it was luxury food, and then it became more and more commonplace and more of a necessity in people's eyes. And a lot of trends work that way. Luxuries become necessities, and it weakens us. It makes us weaker and weaker with each passing generation. But back to the nutrition, if you eat a high calorie, low nutritionally dense food, your body has to create the energy to break that food down. If that food's not providing the vitamins and minerals, then you don't have the capacity to break that food down. So then your body instead will convert that food into other things. One of the things it will convert it into is a triglyceride, especially carbohydrate. If your diet is rich carbohydrate, you'll make more carbohydrates, or I'm sorry, you'll make more triglycerides from carbohydrates. And when your triglyceride levels go up, they pack around your liver and they cause your liver to become fatty, right? And then now your cholesterol goes up and they want to put you on a statin. This is the chain. And this is why keto diets are so popular. Carnivore diets are becoming more popular. And I don't look, I'm not saying that I'm not a fan of them for certain reasons, but I think ultimately what is true about keto and what is also true about carnivore diets is that they're grain-free diets. And so they're really just another level of a grain-free diet with even further restriction. And I think a lot of the people that feel better when they initially go keto or carnivore is because they're actually going grain-free, which we
Mhm.
could talk about the ins and outs of gluten as a poison, as a toxin. Gluten certainly is the most well-studied trigger of autoimmune disease, right? Most well-studied autoimmune disease happens in your gut as celiac disease. But gluten, aside from gluten, grains contain, other proteins that rip holes in the gut lining and activate little receptors in the gut called amylase trypsin inhibitors, which cause inflammation in the GI tract directly. So this is not even a gluten reaction, right? It's a different reaction altogether. We also know that grains are oftentimes contaminated with mold and mycotoxins, and those molds and mycotoxins can damage your liver and can, create inhibition of DNA and RNA production, which makes it harder for you to heal and helps you to age faster. We know that grains are super high and super rich in omega-6 fats, which are highly inflammatory when they're overbalanced. So if you're not getting enough omega-3, which you don't get any omega-3 really from grain, but you're eating grain as a staple food in the US, 60% of all calories come from wheat. And so we know it's a staple food, right? And so you're getting this really high omega-6 inflammatory fat ratio. You're getting mold, you're getting mycotoxins, you're getting pesticides, predominantly glyphosate, because most grains today are sprayed twice with glyphosate, once before they're planted and once during harvest to dry them up before the combine. So you're
And
getting
it's
all those
only
things.
called organic if it's sprayed as a desiccant at the end. So that's what people don't understand. Like, oh, but it's organic, so it's glyphosate free. No, that's not what organic means. Organic does not mean glyphosate free. It means lower in glyphosate potentially.
Yeah, and the FDA, the story behind glyphosate too is the FDA didn't even have a way to measure it until a few years ago. Yet they had created an upper level limit that nobody could measure. The whole thing is nonsense. The whole thing is like it's like a bunch of lawyers were just trying CYA for the government and for the industry. Anyway, back to the point. I know we've diverged a lot, but at the end of the day, if you eat bad food with lots of calories and low nutrients, you're going to cause vitamin and mineral deficiencies. The way I want you to think of vitamins and minerals, if you own a car factory and you're putting together a car, you need steering wheels and brake pedals and doors and tires, all the things that cars are made from, right? Think of those ingredients as like carbs, fats, and proteins, right? Those are building blocks to everything our body's made out of. You have carbs. It's really even deeper than that. You have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus are the main elements that go into creating who you are as a human, right? And so those building blocks, if we're again go back to the car analogy, those are the steering wheels and the doors and the frames and the tires, right? But those things just don't self-assemble. You have to have factory workers putting those things together, and that's what vitamins and minerals are. They're the factory workers that pick up the tire and put it on the car, that screw the steering wheel in to make sure the airbag is running right, make sure you have a radio with a button, right? And so if you don't have adequate vitamins and minerals, what you have is a bunch of parts. Chaotically, those parts can oxidize, those parts can malform, and when that happens, that's where disease comes from to a large extent. So that's why diet's so important. That's why it's the number one thing that you have the ability to control and think about and do better with. And that's why, at least in my experience, you will never heal, you will never repair, you will never overcome chronic autoimmune gut condition or any other form of autoimmune disease without changing your diet. I don't care how many supplements you take, doesn't matter. Supplements do not fix a diet that is inflammatory. You
Yeah.
can't keep eating poison and think supplements are going to cure your body from eating the poison. Imagine a fish tank and all the fish are swimming around and the water's got poison in it, and you're putting organic food in the water. They're still going to die, right? Those fish are still going to be sick. The environment has to be, your environment internally and externally. I mean, we could talk about environmental, chemicals and other things, but at the end of the day, the food is the control point because its job is to nourish you. Its job is not to create a war for you. And most people don't realize that the very food they're eating, their body has to battle it. And so they're using most of the nutrients the food is providing to battle the very food that they're eating. And so they end up like a bank account that's devoid of cash. They end up writing hot checks. And then the constable comes to the door and throws them in jail. And that's what disease really is.
Really well said. So I have two quick questions for you as we wrap up here. One is for the folks who and hang on, Summit Junkies. I've got you covered. That's you're the last question. But for the folks who are in between, they kind of waffle. They do what they can, and they're like, "Well, I know gluten's bad. I only eat it sometimes, right? Or I'm doing my best." And that's the frame of mind they have. What would you say to those folks, and how to consider their responsibility and what they need to do next?
No greatness was ever achieved with a mediocre attitude. You want to be great. Ask yourself, and look, not everybody wants to be great. I'm not here to judge. You know, if you want to choose mediocre food, if you want to justify cheating, there will be a price that you have to be willing to pay. And if you're willing to pay it, then it's yours to pay it. And it's not mine to judge. It's yours to pay. You just have to ask yourself what you want, and then you have to go get it. And if you want health, you have to go get it. You can't justify bad choices if that's what you want. Again, no judgment for me. I just, I don't even work with people who aren't serious at this point in my career. To me, every hour lost on trying to convince somebody they need to do something is a total hour lost. And time is way too valuable and precious because there's way too many sick people who are at a point where they're willing to make the changes. They're just starving for somebody to give them guidance. And because medicine is not a great field for that.
Right. Yeah, that's why I call it the medical industry, not usually don't refer to the medical field for all the reasons we talked about today. So the last thing I'd love for you to comment on is the folks that are listening, and I can feel their thought process right now. And they're saying, Dr. Peter, I've been off gluten for 10 years and I'm still on just a few foods and I'm supplementing, I've tried all the diets, I've tried all the things. How should I be thinking about this? What should I try next?
You've been piecemealed. Piecemealing is when you take a good concept and apply it in part without putting the other important non-negotiable parts in as well. There's 6 non-negotiable fundamentals of being healthy. The first is what you eat. The second is how you sleep. The third is how you move, your exercise. The fourth is clean air. The fifth is clean water. And the sixth is stress control and stress management. These are not negotiable things. You can try to negotiate with them. You will always lose. I do every time I try to negotiate with them. I see it. I've seen it in thousands of people. If you don't get a good night's sleep, you're not going to perform as well tomorrow. If you don't eat a good meal, you're not going to think as clearly. Like that's why they're non-negotiable. Yeah, I realize no one's perfect, and we're not asking for perfection from anyone. Everybody has weak moments. Everybody has flaws, including myself, and that's okay. But it's what you do day in and day out consistently, right? And so if you think you've done all those things, like if you've stuck and you're doing those things, then where you're at is you're at a place where you've been piecemealed because you don't understand your unique biochemical need. So there's different things that need to be measured in anyone who's struck or stuck or struggling. And these were the things I discovered to bring this story back around to the very beginning of it. When I was in the VA hospital, I discovered 4 primary trigger factors for autoimmune disease. So number 1 was food, and that needs to be measured. If you've already done an elimination diet and you're stuck and you don't know what else you could avoid or what else you need to avoid, you need to have it measured. And there are 6 different ways your immune system can react to food, and all 6 need to be measured. Most people measure one way, IgE. Some doctors will measure IgG, and that's okay, but it doesn't measure all of you. You need IgA, IgG, IgM, you need immune complex, you need T cell response, and you need IgE. And if you don't measure all of them, you could be missing something. That's what I mean by piecemealing. You have parts of data, but you're missing the complete picture. So that's food, right? So that's one trigger. The second trigger is chemical exposure. Chemical exposure, what could that look like? That could look like heavy metal. You think about mercury, arsenic, cadmium. It's one of the problems with grains. Grains are heavily contaminated with mercury, cadmium, arsenic. The other thing you think about in the chemical family is what chemicals you use in your house to clean your house. Do you have a Glade freshener? Do you have one of those air plugins, that just pumping out toxic neurological chemicals in your house all day? Do you wear perfumes and colognes? What's the fragrance that you're applying and your hair when you wash your hair? What are all those things that you're applying and rubbing on your body, assuming that they're safe and assuming that they're somehow healthy? Those can be measured. First of all, you should do your best to be as natural as you possibly can be. But, there are even beyond that, people can be reactive to natural things. I mean, I get people allergic to rosemary all the time. Rosemary is a major ingredient in a lot of soaps and shampoos. So chemicals need to really be looked at and measured. And another example of a chemical that's really overlooked and very quite common is mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are the metabolic byproducts produced by mold, environmental molds, and they can really make you sick. And they are big time drivers. I estimate 1 in 3 households has a mold problem. They just don't know it. That's my estimation. It's a big problem. We're going to hear more about mold in the next 20 years. You're going to know that mold and mycotoxins, you're going to hear those words 20 years from now the way you think about gluten today. They will be at the forefront. Today, everybody's just kind of whispering about mold, a little bit here, a little bit there, but it's going to become a roar just like gluten did. But chemicals. So back to the 4. So food, chemicals, those can be measured as well, and they should be measured. If you're struggling, you should have them measured. The third is your microbes in your gut. So your gut itself, right? Your microbiome is very critical to your health. You're actually outnumbered genetically by bacteria and fungal microorganisms that live inside of you. Like, and their importance is tremendous. They help you make vitamins. They help you digest your food. They help produce mucin, which coats and lines the GI tract, preventing it from leaking. They talk to your immune system. Actually, they have a telephone line to your immune system, kind of like the president and the Pentagon. And they're like, hey, what's coming down the mouth? Oh, it looks like some bad McDonald's is coming down the mouth. Maybe you ought to mount up some IgA and some other cannons of immune power so that we can neutralize this food this person just ate, right? Like, that's what your bacteria help you do, is they talk to your immune system and prepare it so that it can respond and react appropriately. So you can measure that, and you should, because many people don't have adequate quantities of healthy bacteria. Many people have inadequate quantities of the wrong kind of bacteria. There's several species of gram-negative bacteria that are primary drivers for autoimmune disease. If you don't know you have them, I mean, then and they're not like infections, like the acute infection where you have 102 fever and you're in bed and you're feeling that way. These are slow burners. These are long poisons, like I said before. You could have a yeast overgrowth or fungal overgrowth in your GI tract, and that can all be measured. So looking at your microbiome fundamentally and understanding, the milieu to the best of your ability is an important thing to measure. And then the fourth is your nutritional status. Okay. I said earlier, vitamins and minerals are the workhorses in the factory. They're the ones that put the parts together, right? So if you don't have zinc, for example, if you're lacking zinc, you need zinc to make digestive enzymes. So think about how just the zinc deficiency could cause a digestive enzyme deficiency that could cause food malabsorption, that could cause putrefaction in your gut, that could cause constipation, that could cause malnutrition, right? We're just talking about one little simple mineral.
Yeah.
There are 40 essential nutrients, and you should have them measured. And the best way to measure them is intracellularly, not in the serum. A lot of doctors are looking at them in the serum, and that's an inaccurate way to assess nutrition status.
You're saying that. Yeah.
Right. You need to have those measured, and then you also need to have your capacity to digest your food measured because that's part of your nutrition. So there are three primary systems involved in helping you digest your food. The first is obvious, that's your GI tract, right? So, you can measure parts or aspects of your GI tract around absorption. So you can measure for fat and protein and carb malabsorption. You can measure for digestive enzyme production. You can measure pH. These are all different things that can be measured to help you understand how well your GI tract is going to functionally work to help you break your food down to extrapolate the nutrients from it. The other two organs that are what we call accessory organs to the GI tract, one is your liver. Your liver produces bile, and bile is an acid that it emulsifies fat so that you can absorb it. So, when you think about fat being an important component, we've gone through this no fat diet craze of the 80s and 90s. Fat's super important. Omega-3 is fat. Vitamin A is fat. Vitamin D is fat, right? So you have A, D, E, K, and omega fatty acids are essential nutrients. And if you have a dysfunctional liver, a fatty liver, or if your gallbladder's been removed, these are problems potentially for you that need to be addressed, with the help of your doc and or your practitioner so that you understand what you need to do. And then the other organ is your pancreas. And your pancreas has two functions, or more than two, but it's got two basic major functions. It's got an exocrine function and an endocrine function. The endocrine function is the insulin production. So it helps you regulate your blood sugar,
Mhm.
which is important for appetite and how hungry you are and whether you have carb cravings, right? But the other function of your pancreas, the exocrine function, is that it releases digestive enzymes into your small intestine to help you break down your food. It also releases bicarbonate, H2CO3, which is it's a buffer that neutralizes stomach acid so your stomach acid doesn't burn a hole in your small intestine. And so that your pancreas can be assessed, right? There are different laboratory analyses where you can measure pancreatic function, you can measure liver capacity, liver function. Doctors can also run ultrasounds on these organs and make sure there's nothing visibly anatomically grossly wrong, but you can have the biochemical milieu of these organs assessed, and you can have your nutrition status assessed by measuring vitamins and minerals. And if you have the keys to those 4 points, right, of information, again, food, chemicals, microbiome, and then digestion, absorption, vitamins and minerals, those all put together equate to what we call the primary non-negotiable biochemical factors that can be measured, that can give you a blueprint to follow in your diet or lifestyle plan so that you're no longer guessing at what you should be doing. Because a lot of people do the best they can with the tools they have, and then they hit a plateau. And that plateau is generally because there's something that they're working from a premise of lack of knowledge. And so there's something they're not doing that they should be. And oftentimes it's not something, it's some things, right? Because it's never, when I look at testing across the board with my experience, I never find a smoking gun. The closest thing I ever find to a smoking gun is gluten. Second closest, maybe mycotoxins. But at the end of the day, usually people have anywhere from 15 to 20 different unique sets of issues from those 4 categories and sometimes more. And that's what can make it overwhelming. And that's why a lot of people continue to struggle. A lot of people get better because they've hit all the right notes, but a lot of people continue to struggle because they don't know what notes they're missing. And their doctors don't even know to begin, how to begin, making that assessment because they're not, I won't say they're not privy to that knowledge, but they've never given it time and attention, and they've never applied it in the way that it needed to be applied clinically. And so that's where I said earlier, they just do their patients a huge disservice by really pretending, right? Pretending that if we sweep your symptoms under the rug with a toxic cocktail of chemicals that somehow will improve your quality of life. And then I can go to sleep at night thinking that your quality of life is better, knowing that I've just made you a slave to multi hundreds of dollars a month of pharmaceutical bills for the rest of your life while not solving your problem. But the reality is, you can empower a whole lot of people by knowing those 4 categories of biochemistry and helping them create a blueprint to apply that knowledge in their own life. And that to me is if you're stuck, you have to start there. Quit trying to use your health as if you're stuck. It's no longer a do it yourself at home project. You got to get an expert. You've got to get somebody who understands this stuff on your team, who understands the biochemistry of analysis and understands lab. Because if you don't, the other problem I see, Sinclair, is that you get people who maybe will measure one aspect of those 4 things. You know what I mean? And then, so like for example, they'll get the vitamin D test from their doctor, and their vitamin D was low, and so they'll take vitamin D. But what about zinc and B12 and I mean,
The
so
green pharmacy, you're low in these
uh,
37 markers. Here's 37 different supplements.
yeah.
A shopping bag and a big to-do list, and it doesn't actually help you heal.
So my credo is test, don't guess. If you're stuck. Now, if you're not stuck and you've never applied the basic fundamentals, apply those first. Don't go visit the doctor. Apply the fundamentals first because you may be surprised at how much better you feel. You may feel, but you may take you 3 months to get to see your doctor anyway. So apply those in that 3 month interim so that when you do go, you'll have at least a basis for understanding how much your health can improve with just some simple change in your life. But the whole point of seeing a doctor is that you're beyond your expertise. And if the doctor of the future is the patient, then the patient has to embrace the 6 fundamentals on a consistent enough of a basis to give their body the opportunity to heal and repair and maintain itself. And again, with the plateau, that's when you seek the expertise. That's when you quit the do it at home project and you make it, you embrace an expert. So that's the best advice I could give, in terms of helping those folks who are just trying to figure it out. Because I know how frustrating that can be when you're sick because you're not thinking clearly when you're sick, right? Your brain doesn't work as quick. It's not as fast. You're trying to, and it's like trying to swim when you can't keep your head above water and you're not getting enough oxygen, and it's just really hard. It's really hard to do everything that needs to be done when you're not able to think clearly. So enroll a partner in your care, and that's the best thing you can do sometimes, right? Is seek out an expert, but seek out somebody who understands those basics. Don't go to somebody who's going to just continue your perpetual piecemealing,
Right.
right? If you go into a doctor, let me give you an example. If you go into a doctor and they say, well, let's just check your thyroid first, and we'll do that for a while. That's piecemealing. Your thyroid is not your body. Like your thyroid is one organ of many organs. And so there's nothing wrong with measuring your thyroid and checking your thyroid or checking your adrenals. There's nothing wrong with checking your gut. But if you don't do it in a comprehensive way, you're gonna come away from that table with 10% of the puzzle pieces. And you ever try to put together a puzzle where 90% of the pieces weren't even in the box? And you didn't have what the puzzle was supposed to look like you didn't have a picture of what it was supposed to look like other than maybe a memory of what you remember good health maybe feeling like. So you're working on a memory with brain fog and you don't have all the pieces and like anyway.
I've spent years that way. I vividly remember it. It's really awful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful.
Thank you so much for all of your insights today and for sharing the different frameworks and how you look at things with your patients and for spearheading this conversation in such a fantastic way. This is so important that we reclaim our integrity in the medical field and unhook from the medical industry, right? And, I just love the work that you're doing. Thank you for being an advocate for people with chronic health issues, especially, the folks listening today. they need more of this, not less. So, we're blessing you on your path. And I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. And thank you for putting on an event like this. I know it's a lot of work and
It's
there's
a
a lot.
ridiculous amount of work, but it's my joy to do it. Every one of these interviews is a love letter to, where I was 10, 15, 20 years ago. I remember what it was like. Guys, all you need listening in is just that next nugget, that reason to keep going, that reason to take back that much more responsibility. Like, you got this. You got this.
Amen.
Thank you for tuning in to Doctor Talks. We hope today's episode has enlightened and inspired you on your path to optimal health. Each day is a new opportunity to make choices that empower your well-being. For more insights and strategies, subscribe to our podcast and visit our website, www.drtalks.com. Stay connected, stay healthy, and join us next time on Doctor Talks, real talks from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.